The diner smelled faintly of coffee and fried bacon, the kind of place where time felt slower and the regulars always ordered the same thing. A jukebox in the corner played an old Motown tune, its soft hum filling the otherwise quiet night. Only a few tables were occupied, 2 truckers sipping black coffee, a couple of teenagers sharing a plate of fries, and a man in a crisp navy suit who looked completely out of place. Jonathan Blake, CEO of Blake Tech, had built his empire from a tiny software shop in Boston to a billion-dollar tech company headquartered in Atlanta. At 50, he was a legend in boardrooms, sharp blue eyes, razor-cut jawline, and a reputation for being 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Tonight, though, there was no boardroom, no glass tower, just a diner with chipped tables and flickering neon lights. In front of him lay the thick stack of papers, merger documents for a deal so massive it could cement his place in history. But Jonathan wasn't reading with the usual precision that made him feared by competitors. His pen had stopped moving, and his brow furrowed deeper with every page. Emily Carter noticed. She was 20, wearing a faded gray apron that smelled faintly of hash browns and coffee. Most nights, she floated between tables with the ease of someone used to being overlooked. But tonight, something about the man in the corner drew her eye. He wasn't just reading. He was wrestling with that contract as if it were a bear. She set a glass of water on his table with a gentle smile. "Looks like you've got quite the fight on your hands," she said softly. Jonathan didn't even look up. "It's a contract," he muttered. "You wouldn't understand." Emily tilted her head. "I might." That was all it took to snap him out of his trance. He slammed the contract down flat on the counter, his voice cold and sharp. "If you're so smart, then translate this." The words sliced through the warm hum of the diner like a blade. Forks froze mid-air. The teenagers stopped whispering. Even the jukebox seemed to hesitate on the next note. Emily didn't flinch. She simply looked down at the heavy stack of papers in front of her, then back at him. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, expecting her to retreat, maybe mumble an apology before walking away. But instead, Emily placed one hand on her hip and reached for the contract with the other. "Is this the entire document?" she asked, her voice calm but steady. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, amused at her boldness. "Does it matter?" "It does," she replied. "Context changes everything." He gave a dismissive shrug, as though humoring a child about to play with something dangerous. Emily flipped through the pages, her fingers moving with a quiet grace. Her eyes scanned the dense text at a surprising pace, her expression unreadable. The diner's low conversations and clinking silverware faded around her as if she had stepped into a quieter world, one built on logic and precision. Jonathan's smirk faltered just slightly. Here was this young woman, in a faded apron and scuffed sneakers, standing taller in that moment than the man who commanded billion-dollar deals. Something about her composure unnerved him. The truckers exchanged glances. The teenagers leaned forward, intrigued. Even the cook behind the counter slowed his movements, pretending to wipe down a perfectly clean spot just to listen. Emily set her notepad on the counter, pen ready, as if preparing to dissect the document like a surgeon approaching a patient. Jonathan tapped his fingers impatiently, still half expecting her to trip over the jargon, to give up and hand it back. But she didn't. Instead, she looked at him once more, eyes calm but sharp, and began reading carefully. The room felt suspended in that strange silence where everyone was waiting for something to happen. A simple waitress, a billion-dollar contract, and a CEO who had just underestimated the wrong person. Before we see what happens next, make sure to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts. More inspiring stories are waiting just for you tomorrow. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, an amused smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Go on then," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "Show me what you think you know." Emily didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the text as her pen scratched across the notepad in quick, neat strokes. A few minutes later, she looked up and tapped one line on the contract. "This clause right here. It allows the other company to walk away if your stock drops more than 7% after the merger is announced. It doesn't clearly define what counts as market disruption. That's too much wiggle room." Jonathan's smirk faltered. Emily turned another page, her brow furrowing. "And this escrow amount? $400 million, locked down with no release triggers. That isn't a partnership. It's leverage. They'll have you cornered when you're most vulnerable." The diner stayed silent. Jonathan blinked, processing her words. That's Not incorrect, he admitted reluctantly. Emily nodded and kept scanning the pages. You could fix it by adding deliverable-based release triggers, and this clause needs tighter language to prevent market manipulation. Whoever wrote this wasn't looking out for you. Jonathan stared at her like she'd just spoken another language. How do you know all this? Emily finally looked up. I used to read contracts like this in class, pre-law at Emory, before my mom got sick, before I had to start flipping pancakes to pay rent. Something inside Jonathan shifted, barely. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I'm surprised you stayed in town, he muttered. I'm surprised you came into this diner thinking you wouldn't find anyone smarter than you, she replied. The line landed like a clean jab, sharp and unexpected. Jonathan sat back, silent for the first time in a long while. When he finally spoke again, his tone was softer. What's your name? Emily Carter. You ever think about doing more with that sharp mind of yours? Emily gave a faint smile. I did. But life doesn't always care about your plans. Jonathan studied her for a long moment, then looked back at the contract. For the first time in weeks, the words on the page didn't feel like fog. A few days later, Jonathan returned to the diner during the lunch rush. Emily spotted him right away, balancing a tray of glasses as she wove between tables. She gave him a look, not hostile, not curious, just aware. Back for the eggs? She asked, setting the tray down. Back for you, he replied bluntly. Emily arched a brow. I'm working. I won't take long, Jonathan said. I just wanted to say thank you. You saved me, millions at least. You sure you want to be seen thanking a waitress? She asked lightly. That's the thing, he said, sliding onto a stool. I'm not sure you're just a waitress. Emily crossed her arms. What else do you think I am? Someone who understands systems. Someone who sees through language. Someone who, if given the chance, could outthink half the lawyers I've ever hired. Emily studied him carefully. So what are you offering? A job? Not exactly. I'm offering a conversation. No suits, no condescension. Just coffee. My treat this time. After a pause, she tilted her head slightly. Come back at 10. That's when my shift ends. If you're serious, you'll wait. I'm serious. That night, they sat in the same booth. Jonathan asked how someone like her ended up at a diner instead of a courtroom. Emily told him her story plainly, how her mother's kidney failure led to endless dialysis appointments, how Medicaid barely covered it, and how her little brother had started getting into fights at school. Bills piled up. School had to wait. But Emily never stopped studying. Law journals, legal blogs, anything she could get her hands on. She even started coding, dreaming of a legal literacy app to help people like her family understand the papers they were forced to sign. Jonathan listened quietly. For once, he wasn't the one leading the conversation. I'm not asking for charity, Emily said finally. Good, Jonathan replied. I'm not offering it. I'm offering partnership. I'll fund it. You lead it. Emily hesitated. I'm not going to be your project. I want to be your equal. You will be, he promised. A week later, Emily walked into Blake Tech headquarters for the first time. Everything gleamed, polished floors, glass walls, and employees in sleek suits. She clutched her worn leather binder like armor. The receptionist looked her up and down and smirked. Waitress Emily, she muttered under her breath. Emily held her chin high and kept walking. Jonathan was waiting for her in the boardroom. But Richard Hale, the company's senior VP of legal affairs, wasn't impressed. When Jonathan introduced Emily as the lead on the new legal literacy app, Justice Bridge, Richard raised an eyebrow. You're serious? Jonathan didn't waver. Completely. Richard smiled thinly. Of course, Will. Support her. Support wasn't what Emily got. Her access badge mysteriously stopped working one morning. She was left waiting in the lobby for an hour while the team started without her. Another day, an important meeting was rescheduled without her being informed. Documents she prepared were returned to her covered in unnecessary edits, her ideas dismissed as too ambitious. Through it all, Emily remained calm, steady. She kept showing up. She kept working. She poured her evenings into refining the app on her beat-up laptop while her younger brother did algebra homework on the couch and her mother dozed in the recliner. Richard kept trying to push her out, but Emily wasn't going anywhere. Emily quickly became a familiar face in the glass-walled innovation lab at Blake Tech. She was younger than anyone in the room, dressed simply, and lacked the polished confidence of Ivy League graduates. But none of that seemed to matter when she spoke. Her voice carried quiet authority, not from power, but from clarity. Every day, she refined Justice Bridge, an app that turned intimidating contracts into plain, understandable language. It wasn't just software to her. It was a lifeline for people who had never been given the chance to understand their own rights. At first, some developers were skeptical, but they soon realized she wasn't there to play boss. She asked questions, listened to their ideas, and respected everyone's input. Junior designers found themselves testing features before the senior ones, and Emily made sure every contribution was acknowledged. Slowly, the team began to believe in the project, not just as an assignment, but as something meaningful. Richard Hale, however, was far from pleased. He attended meetings just long enough to throw out phrases like potential liability and risk mitigation. Then he'd send follow-up emails suggesting Justice Bridge's outreach be scaled back for safety. "This isn't a college project," he told her one afternoon, standing a little too close, his smile tight. "There are boundaries you may not fully understand." Emily met his gaze calmly. "I understand boundaries. I've lived inside them my whole life." The following week, she received a redlined version of her proposal. Every ambitious feature crossed out. "Too much legal exposure," Richard had scribbled in the margins. That evening, Emily printed both versions, the one she had written and the one he had gutted, and placed them on Jonathan's desk. "I'm not scaling back," she said firmly. Jonathan read Richard's edits silently, his jaw tightening. Then he looked up. "You're right. We go with your version." Emily blinked. "That easy?" "That necessary," he replied. From that day, Jonathan began to watch her differently. He wasn't just impressed with her intellect. He respected her courage. She didn't shout, she didn't demand recognition, but she never let anyone silence her either. Late at night, Emily worked at her kitchen table on her battered old laptop, its screen held together with duct tape and stickers. Her younger brother Marcus sprawled on the floor nearby, grumbling about algebra homework. "You think they're really going to let you finish it?" Marcus asked one night, pulling out an earbud. "Finish what?" she said, still typing. "The app, Justice Bridge. You think those rich guys are really going to let you?" Emily paused, looking at him for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly. "I'm not waiting for permission." Marcus studied her like he was trying to understand that kind of boldness. Finally, he nodded and went back to his homework. Over the next few weeks, the app began to take shape. The team debated over color schemes, interface layouts, and user flow. Emily's vision guided every decision. She insisted on features that made Justice Bridge accessible for high school students, working-class adults, and people whose first language wasn't English. "Law shouldn't feel like a weapon only a few people know how to use," she told the team during one late-night session. "It should feel like a tool everyone can hold." The developers, some of whom had entered the project skeptical, found themselves nodding in agreement. One afternoon, Luis, a UX designer, told her quietly, "My cousin got taken advantage of signing a lease he didn't understand. This app, it would have saved him." Emily smiled. "Then let's build it for him, and everyone like him." But Richard's opposition only grew stronger. He started lobbying board members and investors, warning them about reputational risks if a young woman without a degree became the face of Blake Tech's most public project. Emily overheard pieces of conversations in hallways. Words like inexperienced, unqualified, and not the right image. Each time she swallowed the hurt and kept going. One morning, she arrived at the lab to find her badge deactivated again. She waited outside for almost an hour while the team meeting went on without her. When she finally got in, Richard was at the whiteboard discussing refocusing rollout strategy to reduce school outreach. "We can't risk being accused of giving legal advice," he said smoothly. "It's not advice," Emily replied, her voice steady. "It's education. Every scenario is based on public statutes, and every outcome is paired with disclaimers." Richard smiled at her like she was a child playing grown-up. "Even so, the company has a reputation to protect." "Scaling back outreach isn't protecting the company," Emily said quietly. "It's protecting old systems." Some heads turned. Jonathan wasn't in the room, and Richard took the opportunity to push harder. After the meeting, Emily sat at her desk staring at her laptop screen but not seeing it. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear but with frustration. That night, she returned home exhausted. Her mother was asleep in the recliner, a heating pad on her hip. Marcus sat on the couch, working through a problem set. Emily sat down beside him, rubbing her temples. "You look tired," Marcus said. "I am," she admitted softly. "You could quit, you know," he offered, half joking. She looked at him and shook her head. "Not when people like Mom are out there signing things they don't understand. Not when kids like you deserve better than the world gives them." Marcus studied her for a moment, then grinned. "You're kind of scary when you get like this." Emily laughed quietly. "Good." At Blake Tech, Jonathan noticed the way Emily kept showing up, no matter how many roadblocks Richard threw in her way. He saw how she stayed calm when dismissed, how she kept fighting not with anger but with persistence. One night, Jonathan stayed late, watching her lead a team huddle around a cluttered table full of diner leftovers and vending machine coffee cups. She wasn't barking orders, she was listening, asking questions, encouraging ideas. He realized she led in a way completely different from him, and in many ways, far better. It wasn't just that Emily was brilliant, it was that she refused to disappear. And Jonathan was starting to understand just how much the world had underestimated her. It was nearly midnight when Emily finally leaned back from her laptop, eyes burning from staring at the screen too long. The lab was empty, the hum of the server racks the only sound around her. She'd been reviewing the final version of the merger agreement again. Something about it felt off. She scrolled to a section buried deep in the appendix, a schedule labeled Contingency Triggers. The language looked deceptively ordinary, but one word jumped out at her. Temporary. Her heart picked up pace. The clause read, "In the event of a market-based valuation event resulting in a temporary decline exceeding 7% of pre-merger market cap, Kessler Solutions retains the right to withdraw from the agreement without penalty." Temporary. Emily pulled up earlier drafts from the archives. In every prior version, that word hadn't been there. It had been added just 3 weeks ago, after the final legal review. It hit her like a punch to the chest. If Blake Tech's stock dropped just once, even for a single day, Kessler could walk away free, leaving Jonathan's company bleeding out in the middle of the deal. Emily grabbed her phone and called Jonathan, who answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. "I need 5 minutes," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "Emily?" he asked, instantly alert. "What's going on?" "You're about to get played," she replied. "Meet me in your office." 15 minutes later, Jonathan stood in his glass-walled office, sleeves rolled up, tie askew. Emily laid the printed page on his desk and tapped the clause with her pen. This word, temporary. It wasn't in the original draft. They slipped it in. If your stock dips even once after the announcement, they can void the deal and walk away without paying a cent. Jonathan scanned the page, his eyes narrowing. "I've seen this clause. Raymond's team reviewed it." "They skimmed it? Or worse, they missed it," Emily said. "Look closer. If Kessler spreads a rumor, tanks your value for 24 hours, they can back out. No penalty, no consequences." Jonathan's face shifted from disbelief to a slow, simmering anger. Why would they put this in at the last minute? "Because they're playing you," Emily said calmly. "They're waiting for you to announce the deal, watch your stock bump, then leak a story to drop it. Temporary dip, they walk away. You bleed out." Jonathan stared at her, the reality sinking in. "You need to renegotiate this clause," Emily said firmly. "Or you prepare for a very public takedown." Jonathan walked to the window, gripping the bridge of his nose. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. "This," he said slowly, turning back to her, "is why you're here. You saw what no one else would." He didn't hesitate. He picked up the office phone and dialed a number. "Call an emergency board session, 10 a.m. Legal, PR, M&A. We're rewriting this deal today." The next morning, Emily sat silently at the end of a long, polished table. The boardroom was filled with executives in sharp suits, each of them glancing her way with thinly veiled skepticism. Her seat didn't have a nameplate, but everyone knew who she was. Richard Hale entered last, face tight, avoiding eye contact. Jonathan opened the meeting without preamble. "We're pulling Clause F, redrafting the language." Emily Carter identified a loophole that could have sunk this company. She brought it forward. "She's the reason we're still in control of this deal." The room went silent. Richard cleared his throat. "With all due respect, we vetted that clause thoroughly." "No," Jonathan said sharply. "You glossed it. She caught what you didn't." Jonathan looked around the table. From now on, every merger document passes through Emily's desk first. A board member in her 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, leaned forward. "Miss Carter, how did you know to spot something like that?" Emily met her gaze evenly. "Because people like me don't get second chances. We have to read the fine print the first time." The woman's expression softened. "Good answer." After the meeting, Richard cornered her in the hallway. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts, huh?" Emily didn't flinch. "I don't need the spotlight. I have the truth. And unlike you," she added, her voice quiet but cutting, "I don't need a title to make a difference." Richard froze, momentarily stunned. Emily walked away without looking back. That afternoon, Jonathan found her in the lab. He set a folder on her desk. "What's this?" she asked. "Your official appointment, Director of Legal Innovation. Full salary, full benefits, effective immediately." Emily stared at the letterhead, her throat tight. "I thought you said I didn't need a title." "You don't," Jonathan said. "But they do. And they'll think twice before underestimating you again." She smiled faintly, steady and tired all at once. "Thank you. But we're not done yet." "No," he agreed. "We're just getting started." Within weeks, Justice Bridge was ready for launch. Emily stood in front of the development team in the lab, her binder tucked under one arm. "This isn't about making law sound fancy," she told them. "It's about making people powerful. If we do this right, someone like my mom, like my neighbors, won't get trapped in fine print they can't understand." The team nodded. They believed her now, not just in her idea, but in her. The launch day arrived. The auditorium was packed: reporters, developers, school officials, community leaders, and investors. Jonathan stepped up to the microphone first. "Today," he said, "we launched something we believe will change lives, but I didn't build it. She did." He gestured toward Emily. She walked out alone. No music, no fanfare, just her and a microphone. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady. "My name is Emily Carter. I've waited tables. I've paid bills I didn't understand. I've helped my brother stay in school while taking care of my mother. And now, I've helped build something that doesn't belong to boardrooms or lawyers. It belongs to everyone who's ever signed something they didn't understand and paid the price for it. Justice Bridge isn't just an app. It's a flashlight in a room most people don't even know they're locked in. And today, we're giving them the keys to get out." The room held its breath. "This isn't about me," Emily said. "I don't need applause. I need you to listen to what happens when people get tools they were never meant to have, and finally use them to stand taller." She stepped back from the microphone. For a moment, there was silence. Then applause erupted, real and loud, not polite. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and Jonathan, standing at the edge of the stage, smiled like he hadn't in years. Justice Bridge launched that day. Within hours, downloads skyrocketed. Teachers shared it with their students. Tenants used it to challenge unfair leases. A janitor posted online that he'd used it to get back wages that had been withheld. By the end of the week, a major tech site ran a headline that read, "The future of law is here, and she wears sneakers and speaks truth." Emily didn't bask in the praise. She sat quietly in the lab that night, laptop open, already working on improvements. For the first time in a long time, she felt like the world might finally be listening. But she knew the real work was just beginning. 2 months after the launch of Justice Bridge, Emily sat in Jonathan's office, still trying to grasp everything that had changed. The app had been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times. Teachers were using it in classrooms. Community organizers were sharing it at libraries and shelters. It was doing exactly what Emily had dreamed it would, helping people who'd been left out of the conversation about their own rights. Jonathan handed her an envelope with an unusual softness in his eyes. "Open it," he said. Inside was a short letter on elegant letterhead. "Dear Ms. Carter, we are pleased to inform you that your re-enrollment at Emory University has been approved with a full scholarship. We are also honored to rename our Law and Social Change Fellowship in your name." Emily stared at the paper, her throat tightening. "You did this?" she asked quietly. Jonathan shook his head. "No, you did this. I just made sure the world kept up." She blinked quickly, overwhelmed. "I want to finish it," she whispered. "Not for the degree. For the journey I didn't get to finish the first time." "You've already taught more law than most professors ever will," Jonathan said with a smile. "But yes, go finish it. On your terms this time." That fall, Emily walked into her first class as a returning student. No cameras, no reporters, Just her, a spiral notebook, and the same stubborn hunger she'd carried since she was 19. Outside the classroom, Justice Bridge kept growing. It expanded to schools in more than 20 states, then to public libraries and community centers. The team created training modules for people on probation, parents navigating custody disputes, and teenagers signing their first job contracts. Everywhere it went, lives changed in small, quiet ways. A single mother avoided a predatory loan. A factory worker fought back against unfair wage deductions. A high school senior helped her parents contest an illegal eviction. Emily didn't think of these as victories she owned. They belonged to the people who finally had a tool that had been kept from them for far too long. Months later, on a cool winter evening, Emily returned to the old diner where it had all begun. The chipped tables and flickering neon were just the same. She slid into the familiar booth, memories flooding back of the night that had changed her life. Jonathan walked in a few minutes later carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He set one in front of her and sat across from her, the corners of his mouth lifting into a grin. "You ever think it would come to this?" he asked. Emily looked around the diner, shaking her head with a quiet laugh. "I didn't think it would go anywhere." "Funny," Jonathan said, lifting his mug. "Neither did I." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, 2 people who had somehow built something that mattered far beyond either of them. A new waitress approached their table, notebook in hand, her nervous smile betraying how young she was. She hesitated for a second, then said softly, "Sorry to interrupt, but you're her, right? The app lady?" Emily smiled warmly. "I am." "My aunt used your app," the girl said. "She got her job back after being unfairly fired. She told me to tell you thank you." Emily reached out and gently squeezed the girl's hand. "Tell her she did it herself. I just handed her the flashlight." The waitress beamed and hurried back toward the counter, her steps a little lighter than before. Jonathan raised his coffee mug. "To those who never got a second look," he said. Emily lifted her mug to meet his. "And to the ones who make the world look again." Their mugs clinked softly, the sound barely audible over the hum of the old jukebox. No cameras, no reporters, just 2 people who had changed each other, and maybe in some small way, the world. Outside, the city lights blinked on, quiet and steady. Sometimes, the people we overlook carry the brightest light. So never judge too quickly, because kindness and respect can change everything. See you in the next story.